Hi, this is Tim Elmore, and we're going to try something new here at Growing Leaders. I do a number of parent events around the country for a number of organizations and schools and churches, but I've been hearing a topic come up more and more and more at these events that we thought we would just, again, try something new and allow you to listen in and even evaluate yourself right here on a video like this. So this brief session I'm calling Healthy Homes, 16 Issues Parents Must Balance to Raise Healthy Kids. Now we're going to have some fun over the next few minutes, but I'm going to provide you a way to evaluate whether you're doing too much or too little for your kids as you help them grow up to be great young adults. Now, can I encourage you to do something real quick before we jump in? There is a parent engagement scale that's there on your screen. I'm going to encourage you to print that off or download it so you can have that next to you as you begin to evaluate the 16 issues that I believe we all need to balance as we raise healthy kids. Let me start this way. I bet you that everyone listening has met at least one person or at least heard of a person that's kind of a rags to riches story. Malcolm Gladwell even talks about one in one of his books where he talks about a man who came to America as an immigrant with like $20 in his pocket and now is one of Hollywood's most wealthy and most important influential people. But he had a conversation with this gentleman, and Malcolm Gladwell reports that this man confessed that it's been awfully hard to produce the same values and work ethic in his children as he had as a young adult. In fact, I'd like to actually use this as a bit of a case study. Let's just take financial resources as one category of what we provide for our children. This wealthy man talked about how he had nothing when he first came to America, and he had to work for everything. He valued, in fact, opportunity. He valued the chance to work hard and didn't complain at all. And as he began to rise on the scale and make more money, he had values that went with him along the way. But he confessed something a little bit later on that I think is very, very telling, and perhaps you might even relate to it a little bit in your home as well. He said, "My own instinct is that it's much harder than anybody believes to bring up kids in a wealthy environment. People are certainly ruined by challenged economic lives, but they are ruined by wealth as well because they lose their ambition, their pride, and they lose their sense of self-worth." After pondering this for just a minute, he ended up drawing this conclusion. He said, "It's difficult at both ends of the spectrum. There is some place in the middle which probably works best for us all." And I say, bingo. That's exactly right. My guess is that all of us, depending on the category, has been on one end of a spectrum with too much or too little. And we've tried to balance this whole thing and perhaps navigate having too much or having too little, neither of which really helps us very much. So what I'd like to do, again, in the next few minutes is I want to just provide a bit of a case study, and then I'm going to jump into the parent engagement scale where you can actually practice what I'm preaching here. There's a phrase at Growing Leaders that we find ourselves using on our team almost on a daily basis. We'll get into a bit of a debate over an issue, one that has many sides to the issue, but someone jumps in and finally uses this phrase. They simply say, "I think the answer is in the middle." I agree. For so many issues, moderation is the key. We shouldn't have too much, we shouldn't have too little. Somewhere in the middle is where it all works. You remember Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You know, the bed was too hard, the bed was too soft, and then there was one that was just right. The porridge was too hot, the porridge was too cold, and then there was one right just in the middle. So I want to walk you through how this moderation thing works as you prepare kids for adulthood without doing too much or too little. Now, let's step in further. How much is too much? I think you'd agree that money makes parenting easy to a certain degree. But when it gets to that certain point, it stops making it easy at all. When you start having so much money, and I know many of you would say, "I'd love to see that day," but when you come to too much money, it makes parenting very emotional because saying no is very, very difficult when you can afford almost anything. So families who are poor have trouble providing enough resources for their kids, and families who are rich have trouble providing enough boundaries. In fact, I want you to look at the screen right now. I want you to see the statements that I just made. Families that are poor, meaning they have little resources, perhaps they live near or maybe even below the poverty line, have trouble providing enough resources for their kids. I've seen some of these schools, and they're very, very difficult. They're Title I schools in K-12 situations where the kids are just barely making it. They have free or reduced lunches provided for the school, and very often this is because of single-parent homes, or maybe there's a double income, but it's just not enough to provide enough of the resources for the kids to really make it as they move into adulthood. But I'm going to contend with you, it's just as hard on the other side of the coin. Wealthy folks or people that are affluent have trouble providing enough boundaries for their kids. So let me give you one quick example. If you don't have much money and your child wants that latest iPhone or that latest gadget, it's very easy to say, no, we can't afford it. And so really what you're saying is, I can't get it for you. But when you're wealthy, you can't really say that without lying. So you are entering into a much more emotional conversation, and you're forced to say, I won't buy that for you, if indeed you think you shouldn't. Now, I have met people all over the country that are going, I'm not even sure how to say no to my child. I don't think I say no enough. And I would say, as I travel to all 50 states and then to other countries as well, there are many, many people in middle class and affluent nations that would say, I hardly ever say no to my child. And that, my friend, is a problem. Because you know when they move into adulthood, they're going to hear no quite a bit from their employer, from a colleague, from a spouse eventually. And we've got to get them ready in a safe environment like a home growing up where they have both enough resources and enough boundaries to actually thrive. So, without means, you say, I can't buy you that vice. With too many means, you say, I won't. But that invites an emotionally charged debate with your child. And nobody wants this. Now, this actually reminds me of a diagram that perhaps you have seen before. It's called the inverted U diagram. Psychologists Barry Schwartz and Adam Grant argue that nearly everything of consequence follows an inverted U. Too little or too much can both contaminate a child. So let me show you this diagram right now. If you look at this screen right now, you see on the vertical line on the left, you're parenting, okay? And down below, parenting is very difficult. Very high, parent becomes very easy. We would all look forward to that day, wouldn't we? When parenting becomes very easy. I've not found that yet, okay? Now, if you look at the horizontal line across the bottom, that's wealth. Now, let me remind you, I'm just sharing this as one category of the balance we need to find in our life. There's 16 categories, I think, we need to be looking at. Now, watch this. If you're extremely impoverished, if you just have little means, and you start there at that dot that I just put on the screen there, you're going to find that when you're very, very poor, parenting is very, very difficult. You're finding yourself thinking, I'm not providing enough for my children. They're not keeping up with their peers. They won't have the advantages that they need when they graduate from high school and perhaps go to college or start a career. As you begin to make more money along the way, you're going to notice that parenting becomes easy up to a certain point. And by the way, according to these psychologists, Barry Schwartz and Adam Grant, they say on the average of about $75,000, that's when parenting is at a really good place. You have just enough to get them what they need, but not too much that they're now spoiled brats. Can I say that here? And they have too much. Once you make past that amount, you're going to have to having some very emotional arguments and debates, if I can say it that way, when parenting becomes harder and you have to learn to say no if you're going to give any balance. So again, just looking at that inverted U, I bet you could see that that works with wealth and money, but it works with emotional support, it works with jobs, it works with time together. And I'm about to, in just the next few minutes, give you several categories that I think you need to be paying attention to so that you're not doing too much or too little. Let me give you one quick example here. We just looked at wealth as an example. Think for just a minute about technology. On the one hand, if you're very poor, you don't have much means at all, the child has no phone. And maybe you'd say that was good, but they don't seem to even have the devices that all their friends have, and they feel like they're falling behind. In fact, indeed they might be. If they're going to be graduating into a career where they're going to need to use technology, not using it in childhood could be a detriment to their life. But if you push that to the other extreme, now we're talking about technology again. Now they have maybe 2 phones, but they got televisions, they got iPads, they got screens and video games. There's so many gadgets, that child never looks up from their phone. They never look up from the screen. They don't even have the soft skills in their life to have face-to-face conversations. Now, granted, those are 2 extremes, but I'm saying too little or too much in the category of technology would be another area that you say, I got to provide just enough. So let's go further. In our work with athletic departments, we work with a number of Division I athletic departments around the country. I have spoken to coaches and staff and athletic directors, and I have found a pattern. On the screen, you can read these words. When an athlete is very challenging to coach or to lead or to advise, usually one of 2 realities has occurred. Now, these are 2 extremes, but usually the needle moves toward one or the other of these 2 extremes. Either it's abundance, the child has just received too much help from adults. They've had too much over-functioning parents in their life, and now they're not ready for adulthood, or abandonment, meaning the child has not had the adults in their life that are near them. They've not had mentors. They've not had guides. There's been no caring adult that's really provided the kind of guidance that they need to be a well-equipped adult. So again, my hope is that you would not be under either of these 2 extremes, abundance or abandonment. But wouldn't you agree, when there's a problem, as they emerge past 18 years old, usually one of these 2 things has happened if that young adult is not ready to be a young adult. They're still a child. They're still emotionally behind. So let's move forward. My question at this point, before we briefly look at the 16 categories, is simply this. When you reflect on your parenting style, do you perceive areas where you have done too much for your child? How about too little for your child? I just believe that wise parents are always balancing these 2 so they have a child that's both resourced and equipped for life after childhood. So with that said, I want to answer this question now by looking at the parent engagement scale with you. Hopefully you've printed it off by now. But I want to look at this and answer the question, how do we balance our leadership? What I plan to do over this video now, right now, is just to walk you through very quickly through each of these 16 categories, explaining a little bit of what I mean, and then you can certainly then look at the parent engagement scale and evaluate where you are, okay? So let's take a quick look. Issue number 1 there is simply the issue of nutrition, okay? On the one hand, the child perhaps doesn't even have enough food. Maybe they're not even eating 3 square meals a day. Maybe they go to school and they need the school to provide food. We often know of kids in K-12 education that they don't really eat much on weekends because mom or dad has provided enough food. On the other end of the spectrum, however, I bet you and I both know kids that are gorging themselves at restaurants, eating unhealthy food, not well-balanced diets, and they're probably eating way too much. The obesity issue from millennials to Generation Z has gone from bad to worse. But all I'm simply saying is somewhere in the middle, eating a well-balanced diet of healthy food 3 times a day is probably the right answer. Do you lean more toward one or the other? The next issue is activities. Now, on the one hand, maybe that's the parent that doesn't show up at any sports games or any plays or shows or any performances of their child. On the other side of the scale, my gosh, maybe that parent's intrusive on the coach. They're trying to tell the coach how to coach their child, and they're always intervening and always meddling in the issue rather than allowing the coach to be the coach and allowing your child to be disciplined by an adult other than you. That's hard sometimes, but I'm saying in the middle is the answer. Issue number 3, emotional support. You can probably guess what I'm about to say on this one. On the one side, that child may feel like they have no emotional support from a parent or a guide or a guardian. They're just feeling like they're fending for themselves, and they often end up feeling very hopeless about the future. On the other side of the coin, it might be way too much emotional support. Maybe you're always rescuing that child, running that backpack down that they forgot at school today, or that permission slip they should have gotten signed, but they didn't, they forgot, and you're rescuing them, or maybe you're just saying you're awesome to your child just for putting the fork in the dishwasher, when really that should be something that every family member does. So on the one hand, there's hyperbole, we're doing way too much. On the other side, it's not enough. So how do you get to the middle of this issue? That's what I want you to, that's what we're going to begin to cover in just a minute on this video. For technology, I just gave you one example. On the one side, the child may have no devices at all and is not ready for a career that would have any screens in it. But on the other side, there's way too many. And again, that child may have learned to phub. Have you heard this term phub? It's actually a new term in our culture today, where you might be out in public and someone's standing right next to you. And in most social situations, you would say hi to that person because they're standing right next to you. But instead, you phone snub. You phub them by just looking at your phone and never looking up to even greet the person standing right next to you. That's both extremes. Let's keep moving. The next issue is time. On the one side, you might not give hardly any time to your child. And maybe you feel better than you really are, but I want you to evaluate, am I giving the time my child needs from a guiding adult, a guiding parent, or would you say the most amount of their time is spent with peers? And their mentor is not Socrates, it's Josh down the street who's also 15 years old. That's not good. On the other side, maybe you so overwhelmed them with time that now they need to learn to relate to others. It might be that classic stereotype of the homeschool kid that's never really socialized because it's always been so much time with mom and dad. Now, I'm for time with mom and dad. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just saying we got to balance the two. The next issue is resources and belongings. You can guess what I'm going to say here. If you look off to the left on your notes, that's where the belongings and the resources just aren't even there. On the other side of the extreme, oh my gosh, they've got new Abercrombie and Fitch clothes, or I mean, my gosh, they're getting Gap jeans. They've always got the latest brands, and they've got so many clothes that they stare at their closet and they're overwhelmed with what they have. Training. Let's look at this one for just a minute. This is very difficult to balance. And as I look around me and as I look at my own past with my 2 grown adult kids, I see how difficult this was for me. On the one hand, some of us as parents are just so busy we don't do hardly any true training of our children on how to be adults. I just recently talked to a principal of a high school that said the parents are even delegating the teaching of morals and ethics to the school. Well, my gosh, when I was growing up, that was the parents' job to teach values and morals and ethics to the child. But now parents are saying they're too busy. But on the other end of the spectrum of the training issue, my gosh, the parent is providing so much, the child never actually gets to do it by themselves. The parent has been so intrusive that the child is delaying getting a driver's license because they don't have to drive. Mom always drives. The child is delaying the readiness in so many categories because the parent has been overbearing. Now, once again, these are 2 extremes, but I want you just to be very honest as you evaluate, have I done too much or too little? Let's look at the issue of work. I believe it's actually important for a child to learn to work before they're done with school. Very, very often we talk to employers that would say, the young, recent college graduate that I just hired has never once worked a job in their entire life, not even a part-time job. They weren't a newspaper boy, they didn't work in a fast food restaurant, that was below them, they didn't have any job. And now at 22, it's their first exposure and it's a full-time job. So on the one hand, maybe the child had so little means they had to work 2 or 3 jobs and still could hardly make ends meet. But once again, on the other end of the spectrum, perhaps that child never once worked at all for a job. Maybe they didn't even have chores that were enforced around the house to learn to do work, and now the work ethic is underdeveloped. It's a muscle that has atrophied by the time they reach 22 years old. Let's keep going. The next category is relationship example. It's the model that you're setting or failing to set in your home. Do they see loving relationships? Do they see parents that love each other and see a model of what adults are doing and how healthy, well-adjusted adults do life together? Or Is it overbearing again? Have they seen a healthy medium of where they learn to do it themselves, but the parents have allowed them to grow into a healthy adult? Time on social media. Oh my gosh, wouldn't you agree? These can be two extremes. Maybe the child has never once understood social media, and probably in today's world, it's probably good they actually at least learn how it works, because so many of the jobs they're going to go into, the sale of goods and services, are probably going to use social media apps of some sort to make it happen. But on the other side of the coin, I know kids that are absolutely addicted to their phones. They spend the equivalent of a full-time job. I'm not kidding. This is data. A full-time job every week with hours on a screen, absolutely addicted to social media apps. Not good. We need to find a place in the middle. Table time. This may sound silly, but I actually believe one of the bits of research that has been most intriguing to me over the last couple of years is that children grow up to be great adults when there's been great time at a table with parents or with caring adults. Think with me about this. When I was growing up, we always had regular times. I would say 5 out of 7 days a week, we had time around the table with mom and dad. That was just, I think it was part of what made me a fairly healthy adult. In fact, my dad has said to me at 87 years old, the problem with America right now is we don't have meals together anymore. Well, you can giggle at that, but it's true. We're running and gunning, going to soccer practice and violin lessons and recitals and karate, and we're just running and gunning, and I don't think we have time to actually process our day with caring people that help us think well and reflect well. So again, you got to find a place in the middle. Problem solving. I believe if we go to either extreme on this one, the child actually doesn't learn to solve problems really well. Again, they're left to fend for themselves on the one side of the coin, and they don't even know how to problem solve because no one's ever showed them how to do it in a healthy way. They just get angry at the problems they have. Or, once again, the adult has done all the problem solving for them. Not good. Let's keep going. The next one is social interaction. You and I probably know kids on both ends of this spectrum. They're either terribly unsocial because they, once again, have only gotten familiar with a screen and they're not really socially good. Their emotional intelligence is low, or the other extreme. They're so absolutely social. They've got too much time with their friends, and now they need to be around other generations, like parents or grandparents, just to be balanced and know how to interact with somebody other than a peer. Ownership and responsibility. This one is huge. I believe as kids grow older, there needs to be a healthy balance between autonomy and responsibility. Meaning, the more responsibility they actually take and own in their life, the more freedom and autonomy they should receive. When you get a whole bunch of autonomy without much responsibility, you create a brat. And I don't think we need any more brats in the world today. We got way too many already. So how do we balance? They own enough for a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old. They have an age-appropriate sense of responsibility, and we've given them equal autonomy and responsibility. Future plans. Has your child been forced to make all their plans on their own, or has your child been dictated by you, maybe, what the future plans are? And then finally, the last one, maturation into adulthood. I want you to look at your PDF right now of the parent engagement scale. I believe either extreme produces an unhealthy, unready adult because the adults have done too little to get them ready, or they've done so much that the child has always banked on the adult doing the work for them. Now, you can tell that I'm lobbying for the answers in the middle. There is balance. That doesn't mean negligence on the one hand, or it doesn't mean over-functioning on the other hand. It means balance. So getting to the middle is going to require you to talk to your spouse, or if you're a single parent, talking to another caring friend and saying, let's think out loud. Let's process. How do we come to a place in the middle where I'm not over-functioning or under-functioning? And I would say, get accountability. Ask that caring friend or that spouse to hold you accountable. For me, my spouse and I have had to hold each other accountable for these issues. One of us tends to want to do too much, the other too little, and finally, we come to a place in the middle. I would say read books on this subject. There's so many great books that are out there. I did a book just a few years ago called 12 Huge Mistakes Parents Can Avoid. and I actually provide counsel on these kinds of issues for you to provide balanced, healthy parenting in your home. I did another book called Artificial Maturity, where I talk about the fact that we need to produce authentic maturity, not just someone that looks like the mature when they're 18 years old. And then lastly, I'm going to encourage you. I really encourage you to really stop and get quiet and think about each of these 16 issues alone. I think we're so busy in our day, and there's so much noise and clutter coming at us all the time, we don't actually stop, get quiet, and monotask instead of multitask. Just reflect, how am I doing, and what could I do better in these areas? Really, I guess what I'm challenging you to become is a velvet-covered brick. This is actually one of our habitudes at Growing Leaders. In case you're not aware, habitudes are simply images that form leadership habits and attitudes. I want you to look at that photograph I have on the screen right now. Do you see what's on the outside? That's nice, soft, plush, red velvet. Smooth and silky, feels good when you rub it against your skin. But underneath, that's a brick. That's kind of hard and cold and crusty. I believe great leadership actually borrows from both of these two sides. Velvet on the outside, there's lots of support and love and grace and mercy and attentiveness. But inside, you have standards of excellence that you know your child can achieve. You believe in your child that they can do this. And you don't have to fly in and be Superman or Superwoman to bail them out every time they do something wrong. You believe enough to let them do it, and you hold them to a standard. That's what we've got to be. I'll never forget, I'll close with this, I'll never forget getting to meet Liz Murray some years ago. Liz came and did an event with us, and she was absolutely outstanding. But Liz became famous when she became the homeless to Harvard young lady. She grew up on the streets of New York, and when both of her parents died from addiction to drugs, she ended up on the streets as a homeless teenager. Well, she fended for herself and ended up sleeping over at friends' houses, but she was literally a homeless girl until she finally decided, I want to go back to school. She finds a caring adult, she ends up graduating high school, and she ends up entering a contest to go to Harvard University. It's a contest sponsored by the New York Times. She wins a scholarship to go to Harvard University, hence the name Homeless to Harvard. The part of Liz's story that I absolutely love is this. She said to me, Tim, I will never forget standing in my residence hall, my dormitory, for the first time at Harvard University. There was a washer and dryer in front of me, and I began to cry because I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I finally have my own washer and dryer. She said, I happened to be standing next to a classmate, standing right in front of that same washer and dryer, also crying tears. But she said, it dawned on me in that moment, I was crying tears of joy because for the first time I could use a washer and dryer. She was crying tears of desperation as she suddenly realized, I'm going to have to do my own laundry for the very first time. The answer has to be in the middle. And that's my hope for you. Now, as we sign off again, I'm going to encourage you to do some reflection. Again, if you haven't already, download the parent engagement scale. Start putting an X in the middle of that dotted line, or somewhere on that dotted line with an honest evaluation of where you are. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, but I do parent events. In fact, we have an entire team of speakers at Growing Leaders that will do school events, student events, parent events, employer events. But we try to teach healthy, effective leadership everywhere we go. If that would be helpful for you, you can go to growingleaders.com and schedule a phone call with Tyler Yakin. He'd love to chat with you. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful. My hope is you can go out and be a healthy leader who creates a healthy home in the long run.